Long before October 7, 2023, a complex web of historical events, political decisions, and regional tensions was weaving itself into what would become one of the most significant episodes in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The roots of these tensions stretched back decades, but several key developments in the preceding years proved particularly crucial. The situation in Gaza had grown increasingly dire in the years leading up to 23. The strip of land, home to over 2 million Palestinians, had been under a strict blockade since 2007. This containment created immense pressure within the territory, where unemployment soared above 40% and access to basic resources remained limited. Young Palestinians, especially, felt trapped in what many described as an open-air prison. Meanwhile, political shifts within Israel contributed to rising tensions. The formation of what many considered the most right-wing government in Israel's history brought significant changes to security policies and settlement expansion. These developments further strained already tense relations between Israelis and Palestinians. Hamas, which had controlled Gaza since 2007, maintained a precarious relationship with Israel. While periods of relative calm existed, they were regularly interrupted by cycles of rocket attacks and retaliatory strikes. Each escalation left both populations more traumatized and entrenched in their positions. The Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, one of the most sensitive sites in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, became an increasing flashpoint. Growing tensions surrounding access to the site and confrontations between worshippers and security forces added fuel to an already volatile situation. These incidents resonated deeply throughout the Palestinian territories and the broader Muslim world. Regional dynamics played their part as well. Iran's support for various militant groups in the region, including Hamas, influenced the balance of power. Meanwhile, the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states, shifted traditional alliances and left Palestinians feeling increasingly isolated. Economic conditions in Gaza continued to deteriorate. The territory's infrastructure, damaged by previous conflicts and hampered by import restrictions, struggled to meet basic needs. Limited access to electricity, clean water, and medical supplies created a pressure cooker effect within the densely populated area. Security measures along the Gaza-Israel border underwent significant changes in the years preceding the attack. While Israel maintained sophisticated security systems, including the Iron Dome defense system and border barriers, vulnerabilities remained. The focus on technological solutions sometimes came at the expense of human intelligence and traditional security measures. International attention to the Palestinian cause had waned in recent years, as global focus shifted to other crises. This perceived neglect contributed to a sense of desperation among many Palestinians, who felt their situation was becoming increasingly hopeless. Within Gaza, Hamas had been quietly developing its military capabilities. Despite the blockade, the organization managed to acquire and manufacture weapons, train fighters, and develop new tactics. Social media and modern communication technologies played a crucial role in shaping perceptions and spreading information and misinformation about the situation. Both sides used these platforms to present their narratives, but they also served as tools for organizing and coordinating activities. The combination of these factors, political isolation, economic desperation, religious tensions, and military preparation, created conditions that would ultimately lead to the Al-Aqsa Flood operation. The attack would shock the world not only in its scope and brutality, but in its revelation of how these various elements had coalesced beneath the surface. In the months immediately preceding October 23, there were subtle signs of impending action, though their significance would only become clear in retrospect. Increased activity along the border, changes in communication patterns, and shifts in militant behavior all pointed to approaching conflict. Though few predicted the scale of what was to come, the convergence of these various factors, historical grievances, political decisions, economic conditions, and military preparations, created a perfect storm. The Al-Aqsa Flood operation would emerge from this complex backdrop, forever changing the landscape of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and sending shockwaves through the international community. What happened next would demonstrate how years of accumulated tensions, grievances, and preparations could explode into violence with devastating consequences, leaving both Israelis and Palestinians to grapple with its aftermath, and the international community struggling to respond to a crisis years in the making. On October 7, 2023, the Middle East was forever changed when Hamas militants launched a surprise attack on Israel from the Gaza Strip. In what would become known as Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, fighters breached the heavily fortified border fence between Gaza and Israel, initiating one of the most significant escalations of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in decades. The morning began like any other Saturday, with many Israelis observing the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah. But at dawn, thousands of rockets streaked across the sky from Gaza, overwhelming Israel's Iron Dome defense system. Under cover of this barrage, Hamas fighters entered Israeli territory by land, sea, and air, targeting military installations and civilian communities near the Gaza border. The attack caught Israel's military and intelligence apparatus completely off guard. Hamas fighters infiltrated several Israeli towns and kibbutzim, while others attacked a music festival near Ra'im, where thousands of young people had gathered to celebrate. The unprecedented breach of Israel's borders sent shockwaves through the nation and around the world. As news of the attack spread, Israel's response was swift and decisive. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that Israel was at war and initiated Operation Swords of Iron. The Israeli military began mobilizing hundreds of thousands of reservists, launching retaliatory airstrikes on Gaza within hours. The initial Hamas attack resulted in the highest single-day death toll in Israel's history. Civilians were taken hostage, men, women, children, and elderly citizens, and brought back into Gaza. The images and stories that emerged in the following days stunned the international community and reshaped the regional dynamics instantly. Israel's military response intensified rapidly. The Gaza Strip, home to over 2 million Palestinians, faced unprecedented bombardment. Israeli officials announced a complete siege of Gaza, cutting off electricity, fuel, food, and water supplies. The humanitarian situation deteriorated quickly as Palestinians found themselves trapped in an increasingly uninhabitable zone. The humanitarian situation deteriorated quickly as Palestinians found themselves trapped in an increasingly uninhabitable zone. The war's impact rippled far beyond the immediate conflict zone. Global powers scrambled to respond, with the United States immediately affirming its support for Israel, while other nations called for restraint and protection of civilians. The United Nations warned of a humanitarian catastrophe as hospitals in Gaza struggled to treat the wounded with dwindling supplies and power outages. As the conflict intensified, Israel ordered civilians in northern Gaza to evacuate south, creating one of the largest internal displacements in the region's recent history. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians moved southward, seeking safety in increasingly crowded areas, while others remained trapped in the north, unable or unwilling to leave their homes. The war brought new dynamics to the decades-old conflict. Social media played an unprecedented role, with real-time footage and information spreading globally, though this also led to challenges with misinformation and competing narratives. The international community witnessed the conflict unfold with an immediacy never before possible. Diplomatic efforts to broker a ceasefire faced numerous obstacles. Qatar, Egypt, and other regional players worked to mediate, achieving limited success with temporary humanitarian pauses. These brief respites allowed for some hostage releases and humanitarian aid delivery, but sustainable peace remained elusive. The conflict's impact on civilian infrastructure was devastating. Gaza's healthcare system, already strained before the war, reached a breaking point. Hospitals operated without adequate supplies, electricity, or safety guarantees. Schools, residential buildings, and essential services were severely damaged or destroyed in the fighting. The war reshaped regional alliances and tensions. Other actors in the Middle East carefully calibrated their responses, aware that any misstep could lead to a broader regional conflict. Iran's support for Hamas and its proxy forces in Lebanon and Yemen added another layer of complexity to the situation. As the weeks turned to months, the humanitarian crisis deepened. International aid organizations struggled to deliver essential supplies to Gaza's population. The United Nations repeatedly warned of famine conditions and the collapse of basic services. Civilians on both sides endured trauma that would leave lasting scars on their communities. The conflict marked a significant shift in the Israeli-Palestinian dynamics. Traditional assumptions about security, deterrence, and coexistence were challenged. The war exposed vulnerabilities and raised questions about the path forward for both Israelis and Palestinians. The international response revealed deep divisions in how different nations viewed the conflict. While some strongly supported Israel's right to self-defense, others condemned the scale of civilian casualties in Gaza. These divisions played out in the United Nations, international media, and diplomatic channels. As 2023 turned to 2024, the war continued to evolve. The initial shock of October 7th gave way to a grinding conflict that transformed both societies. Families mourned their losses, communities were displaced, and the physical and psychological toll mounted on both sides. The war raised fundamental questions about the future of the region. How could security be guaranteed? What would reconstruction look like? Could trust ever be rebuilt? The answers remained unclear, but the events of 2023 to 2024 had irreversibly changed the landscape of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Looking back, historians would mark this period as a pivotal moment in Middle Eastern history. The Al-Aqsa Flood operation and its aftermath demonstrated how quickly decades of relative stability could unravel, and how the consequences of such conflicts extend far beyond the immediate battlefield, affecting generations to come. Throughout it all, ordinary people on both sides continued to hope for peace, even as the path to achieving it seemed more complex than ever. The war served as a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the urgent need for a sustainable solution to one of the world's most enduring disputes.